Imagine you are Sisyphus, the famous king of Ephyra who was punished by the gods to roll a heavy rock up a hill for the rest of your days, or else. Faced with this responsibility, you start to think, how can I stay consistent with this new task I have? Immediately after thinking about it, you and everyone around you start to think that there's no other way. You simply have to become more disciplined. You simply have to be more responsible and do this every day, whether you feel like it or not. This story is actually really similar to the life of most people, because just like Sisyphus, most people are given a task that they must do every day, or at least they should do every day. And just like Sisyphus, most of them are told that the key to do this task is to become more disciplined, to have more self-control, and to work despite of your feelings. I was given this very same advice when I entered medical school. And yes, I do accept that discipline and self-control are important and valuable skills, but to be honest with you guys, the main reason I stayed consistent with my studies as a medical student, and the main reason I stay consistent with everyday tasks such as reading books, working out, and handling my creative business is not really because I have superhuman discipline or self-control. It's because I've learned how not to depend on willpower in order to be disciplined. That is truly one of the skills I consider to be a superpower, but for some reason people don't talk about this as much, and so that's precisely why I decided to make this video. Try to explain like the art and science of how to create systems where you can be disciplined without actually having to be a disciplined person. And to do this, we're gonna start with a story. So, it is 1971. We are 16 years into the Vietnam War, and the US is having a big problem. Not only because of the war, but because their troops are facing a serious addiction issue. Stats at the moment were showing that between 15 and 20% of the US soldiers stationed in Vietnam were addicted to heroin. To face such a terrible statistic, they put some of their best researchers to work. One of them was Lee Robbins, and she ended up discovering that despite having a huge amount of addicted soldiers, just 5% of them remained addicted after returning home. And this was unbelievable, because up to that point, addiction was considered a personal weakness, basically a problem of character where the person lacks discipline and self-control, and so well, therapy is therefore aimed at helping that individual become more resilient, more disciplined, and better able to self-regulate. However, as the evidence showed at that time, this almost never worked. Statistics showed that approximately 91% of people who were addicted relapsed just a few years after beginning treatment. So that was the notion. Addiction is a problem of character, and a problem of character doesn't go away overnight. Just that in this case, that was precisely what was happening. Soldiers were returning home, and just like that, they stopped consuming heroin. And the relapse rate was just about 12%, something that was literally unheard of. This completely changed how we think about addiction and willpower, because it showed us the powerful role that the environment plays in the formation and repetition of our habits. And if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense. In Vietnam, soldiers were far from home, far away from their routines, their families, the things that kept them grounded and gave them peace of mind. In Vietnam, they were constantly stressed, on edge, paranoid, constantly looking for a way to calm down. You create those conditions and have 20% of the people around you taking drugs, and you effectively create an environment where not consuming drugs is an active challenge. But when you come back home, poof, most if not all of the stimuli you previously had goes away overnight. Just like that, no more reasons or reminders to consume drugs. Your new environment makes it easier for you to stay clean, and so you stay clean. Contrast that with the people who get addicted in their homes with their friends. Sure, they go to rehab, they get better, but once they come back home, everything they see is a reminder of their addiction. The old place they used to consume, the friend that consumed drugs with them, everything makes them want to consume again. Their environment makes it easier to consume, and so, well, they consume. Bestseller author James Clear opens up the 7th chapter of his book Atomic Habits with this story to exemplify one of the most important points in the whole book: that people with the best self-control are typically the ones who need to use it the least. That yes, perseverance, grit, and willpower are essential to success, but the way to improve these qualities is not by wishing you were a more disciplined person, but by creating a more disciplined environment. And that right there is the superpower I was telling you about. The superpower of basically outsourcing discipline into your environment. And this honestly works like magic, because as you'll see in a moment, I'm not actually a very disciplined person. Many people think that I'm disciplined, but it's just because I'm really, really good at making my environment work for me. So let me give you an example. When I was in first year of medical school, I needed to learn about physiology, but the recommended book was honestly a monster. I mean, it was huge, full of equations, it was complex as hell, and honestly, it was just boring. I mean, I never got inspired with that book to open it and read it. So I went to class and I asked my professor if I could instead read the book that my mom had bought, a book that was way shorter and that also was full of illustrations, that used very accessible language, and that even had jokes here and there. My professor, of course, told me no. He explained that that book was just not as complete as the other one, so I would be better off just reading the recommended one. So what did I do? I read my book anyways, and I honestly thought that that decision was going to come back and bite me eventually, but to my surprise, it never did. It was actually one of the best choices I could have made because, you see, although my book was inferior in a lot of technical ways, it was also superior in the sense that it made me feel that learning wasn't a chore, wasn't this boring thing that I needed to do, and in making me enjoy a little bit more the learning process. Reading a module over there was a breeze. I mean, an entire chapter took me just about 40 minutes to go through, and in those 40 minutes I felt genuinely entertained, and so I had no problem opening the book and reading away. In fact, there were plenty of times where I ended up reading extra chapters that I had no business reading because I was honestly enjoying the experience. Now contrast that to the experience my classmates had, where every time they had to study, they had to open this huge, tedious book full of long, boring, and intimidating chapters. That experience was so uninspiring for them that most of them never even finished the chapters they started. They had a better tool, for sure, but because they weren't using it as much, they never got the most out of it. Additionally, this led them to adopt counterproductive habits. For instance, given that they weren't reading consistently, they had to cram most of the reading in the couple of days before the test. And as plenty of evidence shows, when study is crammed, there is greater loss of comprehension and retention. And if you think about it, it's not that they weren't disciplined. I mean, taking a whole weekend to cram several huge chapters of physiology requires a lot of discipline. So that's what I find really funny, that when I tell people that my secret was that I studied consistently and daily, most people think, oh, he's very disciplined. When in fact, I just found it easier to read tiny bits of an entertaining book here and there than to cram a huge, boring book in the last couple of days before the test. So it wasn't discipline, it was kind of the total opposite. But the reason this works is because most productive endeavors in life benefit more from consistency than from intensity. Simon Sinek puts this beautifully in one of his interviews.
So if you were to go to the gym, right? It's like exercise, right? If you go to the gym and you work out and you come back and you look in the mirror, you will see nothing. And if you go to the gym the next day and you come back and you look in the mirror, you will see nothing, right? So clearly there's no results, can't be measured, it must not be effective. So we quit, right? Or if you fundamentally believe that this is the right course of action and you stick with it, like in a relationship, I bought her flowers and I wished her happy birthday, and she doesn't love me. Clearly I'll give up. You know, that's not what happens. If you believe there's something there, you commit yourself to an act of service. You commit yourself to the regime, the exercise. You can screw it up. You can eat chocolate cake one day, you can skip a day or two, you know, it allows for that. But if you stick with it consistently, I'm not exactly sure what day, but I know you'll start getting into shape. I know it. And the same with the relationship. It's not about the events. It's not about intensity. It's about consistency, right? You go to the dentist twice a year, your teeth will fall out. You have to brush your teeth every day for 2 minutes. What does brushing your teeth twice a day for 2 minutes do? Nothing. Unless you do it every day, twice a day for 2 minutes.
And so I literally do this with everything, to an extent that you would find almost ridiculous. For instance, I recently started to hate doing squats. I don't know why, because there was a time when squats used to be my favorite exercise, but for some reason I just don't enjoy doing them anymore. And this was a problem because by not enjoying them, I stopped training quads as frequently and as heavy as I should. So what did I do to solve this? Well, I found a quad exercise that I actually enjoyed doing, an exercise that didn't make me feel all this resistance every time I needed to train legs. That exercise ended up being the pendulum squat, and I literally bought a pendulum squat machine just for this reason and this reason alone. And yes, I know that this is kind of an exaggerated response, but hey, it works for me, and now I enjoy my training sessions again, and this makes me want to train harder, and that drives my results, etc., etc., etc. So that's what I mean when I say that I'm actually not that disciplined. I'm just really good at improving my environments to make it easier for me to do action. And that's kind of how I do everything. Literally, from learning medicine to making videos to reading books to working out, everything, even to study for my test. I've said this before, but the original reason that led me to study for my test using question banks, which is like the most popular method I talk about in this channel, was not because I read all the evidence on effective learning techniques and I realized that the testing effect is the study technique with the most research behind it. No, it was literally because I found all of the other study techniques boring. For instance, in the USMLE, I just couldn't bear the idea of having to reread a book such as The First Aid for 5 to 8 times. In contrast, solving clinical cases always felt kind of fun. I mean, it made me feel sort of like a Dr. House or something. Sure, solving 80 questions a day for 6 straight months is not that fun, but it requires much less willpower than reading the same book for the 5th time, at least for me. Now, I want to make sure I emphasize that willpower and hard work are still very important, because in every path, even in the ones that you don't have to work as hard to start, which is basically what I'm advocating, you eventually have to put in the hard work and the effort. So I want to make that clear, but it's just that I think that we naturally have like a certain amount of energy, like a certain amount of willpower, a certain amount of efforts that we can spend. And so for me, it makes a lot more sense if we get to spend that energy on the things that are really worth our time, not into starting to read the first 3 pages of a book, but instead in putting the extra mile, in reading that extra chapter, doing that extra rep. In a sense, what I'm trying to say is that when you design an environment where starting to take action is easier, you're more likely, well, to start. And you're more likely then to spend the remaining of your energy on the things that truly do matter. But the secret is precisely that, is to start by making things easier on yourself, not harder. And it sounds very simple because, well, it is, but most people simply don't bother with this kind of stuff. They just settle with the recommended book they hate. They settle with the recommended tactic that they saw in the first video they saw. They settle with the recommended exercise. And yes, I know that many people will disagree with this because many people hold the fundamental and kind of Calvinistic belief that the harder you have it, the better. And if that's you, more power to you, but that just has never worked for me. And according to the evidence, it also doesn't seem to work for most people either. And so if you're struggling with being disciplined, maybe the problem is that you're putting too much emphasis on yourself, on your discipline, on your self-control, and on your willpower. Maybe a better solution would be to just outsource a bit of that discipline into your environment so that it makes the decision for you. And there are thousands of ways of doing this, and it can be literally as simple as not having your phone nearby when you're trying to study. Because think about it. When you're trying to study and you have your phone close by, you're putting yourself in a position where your success depends on your ability to constantly decide to not check your phone, to constantly control your impulse, just like in Vietnam, where you're constantly having to resist the stimuli. And well, resisting is tough. Now compare that with just shutting your smartphone off after you arrive home and putting it in a different room. By doing this, you put yourself in a position where you only have to make the right choice once, and then your environment takes care of that for you. So yes, if you're a student and you want to be more consistent with your study, this right here would be my recommendation for you. And one of the best tips I can give you to implement these sort of tactics into your study protocol is simply to just look for better study resources that are not technically superior, but that instead make you want to learn, that inspire you to take action. For instance, let's say you want to learn more about statistics. What would make you feel more inspired to study consistently? Reading very, very dense books like this one, watching 2 hours of long lectures with slides, or engaging yourself in a series of challenges and puzzles like this one. The option that makes you want to learn more is the one you should start using more often. Now, in case you prefer the latter option, there is a platform you can try that is full of these interactive challenges, and it is called Brilliant. And I'm very happy to say that they're sponsoring this video and offering some amazing discounts to my subscribers. So you've probably heard of Brilliant before, but in case you haven't, Brilliant is basically a platform that teaches science and math related concepts through interactive learning techniques. To give you an example, the other day I was learning about the cosmological principle, but instead of having to force myself to go through dense, monotonous papers like this one, I was engaged with a series of challenges about trains and analogies about bread that allowed me to understand what it actually means that the universe is homologous and isotropic. Just like this, Brilliant offers thousands of puzzles, challenges, and fun analogies that help you learn everything from algebra, statistics, and logic to physics, neural networks, and computer science. And so if you like what you hear, make sure to start learning more actively using my link at brilliant.org/SantiagoAQ. And hurry, because the first 200 subscribers that use that link will get a 20% off discount in the annual premium subscription. Thanks a lot, Brilliant, for sponsoring this video, to you for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next one.